What is going on? Welcome back to the channel. It is Drew, and in today's video I have a review of the book that is titled Generation Z Goes to College, written by Corey C. Miller and Megan Grace. Now this is interesting, this book, because it was published in 2016 and they had surveyed several college students that were part of Gen Z in 2014. So as we look back on this book, it is about 10 years old. And so rather than viewing it as a predictor of things to come, we can actually look at what this book says and then compare it to our actual experiences in working alongside Gen Z or teaching Gen Z or just interacting with them in general. But before I dive into the specifics of this book, make sure you hit that subscribe button if you want to continue to see more content like this. And as always, if you like this review, make sure you hit that like button. So this book, Generation Z Goes to College, it was very well thought out and very thorough. So they presented their findings very well. It was very organized, and they looked at who is Gen Z? What do they value? How do they view the world? What are their concerns? How do they view education? How do they view their futures? And so it was all of that, and then it was wrapped up with a final chapter of this is sort of advice to higher ed professionals about how to be able to best serve Gen Z. So we are now working with Generation Z in our institutions, and we will continue to do so for a while until we move into Generation Alpha. But going back to Gen Z in particular, the thing that we all know is that they're digital natives. This is that one generation where they have had technology their entire lives. They know how to use it. They live it. They are online 24/7, where they have access to information 24/7. And the other thing is they have access to customer service 24/7. So it's almost as if they expect communication to be instant. And that is something some of these older generations have struggled with because we're used to business days and business hours. And Gen Z doesn't see it like that. They see it as instantaneous. And I have actually noticed that in my own experience in working with students where I would send them an email and they would respond to me in a few seconds. And then I think after reading this book, I better get back to them right away because that's what they're expecting if I want to get them the information they need. It also talked about their values, how they interact with the world around them. So in spite of being online and utilizing technology so much, they still crave that face-to-face interaction. They still value those interpersonal relationships, both online, but also in the real world as well. And I think that is something we have encountered with COVID. So we had students who were capable of going online into the Zoom world and taking online classes and interacting online, but then we also saw them crave that interaction face-to-face. And so it's a benefit. I think it's an advantage for a generation to be that flexible and to be able to do that. And it's also something that was recommended higher ed institutions are able to do. So it would be hybrid classrooms. So you would have some online conversations, but also still have those students come in and interact with each other in an actual classroom. It also talked about their concerns and how they view the world, in a sense that they're very attuned to world problems. So they care very much about the climate, social justice. They're also a generation that has largely been alive in a wartime society. So they are used to seeing a lot of these things on the news. They're used to hearing about a lot of these things, especially when you throw in that 24-hour news cycle. And that's actually created a lot of anxiety, as we know. And the upside is it makes them very concerned. It makes them very concerned about what they are inheriting and how they are going to approach the world. So they are problem solvers. They're very passionate about finding solutions to a lot of these problems. And they also have an entrepreneurial spirit. And I think that is largely in part due to the rise of technology and removing a lot of barriers to implementing great ideas and having a larger effect on the world rather than just their local environment. So they do have a lot of hope despite being concerned about a lot of things that are going on in the world. And so it really dives into their learning styles, what social media platforms they like to use, why they use them, why they don't. And also when it comes to higher ed, this is what we know as we've seen with the Great Recession, Gen Z has grown up through a lot of these things. They've grown up seeing their parents struggle financially, and they have seen them lose their jobs. They've seen others lose their jobs for no reasons. So when you tie that into the higher education path, they want to know, am I going to get a job with this degree? Because I know I'm going to go into debt, and I want to make sure that this is worth it. I'm trying to avoid debt at all costs, and that is another behavior, is that they don't want to go into debt. So they're going to try to find as many ways as possible to not take that on, or to get an education as affordable as possible. So you have that, you have them wanting to essentially be guaranteed employment. And so it's really important to talk about career readiness in all of these programs. It's really important to give them those hands-on skills. That's what they're seeking. So it's sort of that experiential learning, the internship opportunities, talking about careers in those classes, because they essentially want to know, what are you selling me? Because I'm not necessarily sold, and I want to know that this is going to pay off in the future. And I think that's very valid. I think we need to shift as a whole with our mindset in higher education, because it used to be, you would go with this expectation of, well, I'm going to get my degree and then figure out how to use it. And so Generation Z is kind of holding higher ed accountable and saying, I want you to prove to me how this is going to be valuable, because I've seen people go through this and it didn't pay off for them. So what are you doing? So that's interesting in a sense, and I think that's a good challenge that higher ed can I think they can rise to the occasion. There was an interesting thing though that I noticed in one of the chapters. It was talking about their education, and when they grew up, they lack creativity, and this is mostly a result of K through 12 budget cuts and cutting the arts. And so they are lacking those critical thinking, the creativity. And I see that personally. I don't know if you have observed that yourself. And so it's important for us to be able to help them develop that. And I think part of the reason too with having this access to technology is there's this overabundance of information available to them. So while the asset or the advantage is that they can access any information at any time, the challenge is, how are they filtering through what is credible, what is useful, and then thinking critically about how to apply that to whatever problem they're solving or whatever conversation that they're having as it relates to their class, or how are they going to be able to use this to their own benefit. So there are some things in there that I think are still useful and things that higher ed still needs to address. It also made me think of an article I'd read while I was reading this book, and it was about Generation Alpha and their use of technology and how higher ed can prepare for them. And I will throw a link to that article in the description, and it talked about students, or at least Gen Alpha, really being immersed in technology. And so they really want that virtual reality and the artificial intelligence, and they want that tailored education experience, and they want that immersive classroom. And so I think that's going to be the next big thing, because if you have so many students who are demanding an individualized, tailored experience, how do you provide that while maintaining consistency with learning outcomes and still being able to produce capable graduates without losing any momentum, especially as we approach declining enrollment numbers? Are you still able to provide that service? So that's another interesting thing. I thought that paired well with this book. I think anyone who interacts with Generation Z should read this book, because I think it gives a lot of insight, and you can definitely draw a lot of parallels to your own experiences, and it is reinforcing what you are seeing. So it was a great predictor at its time, and I'm interested to see how this unfolds, and I'm interested to see a similar work like this for Generation Alpha as we move into the future. So that's all I have for you today. Make sure you check this out. I will link to the book in the description as well. And as always with that, I will catch you in the next one.